Alright, so here I'm going to go over the shell modifier. And I'm going to admit here, this is probably my favorite modifier in Max, just because it makes things so much easier. But just to very quickly understand what it does, go ahead and make a line here, and I'll extrude it. Make this an 8-foot wall. And extrude does, shell does exactly that. It shells the geometry. And you have an inner amount, which is the direction from the back side of the normals. So let's go, well, let's say 4 inches on here. And then you have the outer amount, which is in the same direction of the normals. So let's go to top view and see what we got here. Go ahead and make these corner points for now. Show end result. So here we go. I gave it a thickness from inside to out. But one of the things that I kind of quickly go over immediately on the shell modifier is understanding this tapering effect that we're getting. Because actually, let's go back to segment level. What it's doing is it's projecting whatever amount you put in the shell from perpendicular to the line from the vertex. So at this condition, since we did 4 inches and 4 inches, we're getting 4 inches here and 4 inches here. But that's very different than having 4 inches here, which is essentially 90 degrees from the line, where here it's at as a result from whatever the angle difference is between these two lines. So what the guys at Autodesk have done to make things pretty easy is right here, this checkbox that says straighten corners. So now it keeps them all parallel. So that's just one of the kind of key features in the shell modifier. And also one of the things I like to do is kind of show the old way to achieve this effect. So if I go back to the line, get rid of these, what originally we would have done is gone to the spline level, turn off our grids by hitting G, and done an outline. And in this case it was center, and we'll do 4 inches. So that's how we would have done that before, but we really would have lost any type of associative properties we had, where now we can go back down to the original vertex and update this and our lines stay parallel, where with this one, and just to note, it was 4 inches total, didn't do 4 inches in each side. If we start to move these, well, that's just because they're all Bezier by default. Let's make them corner and that'll fix that. See, that's very different condition. So much less flexible, and especially in the context of architectural modeling, which is where a lot of these techniques I've kind of play around with come from. F4, turn our grids on. So we can go back here to the vertex level and update these things. So there's also a lot of other ways we can expand the shell modifier. We have our inner and outer amount, and something I'll do often when I want a walkway is, and we'll get back to these in just a minute, but what I want to do is show these checkboxes here: select inner, select outer, and select edges, inner, outer, and edges. So we're going to select our edges, and you can see here it's made them red. And what I'll do is put a delete mesh modifier. So now I have these two walls that I can control individually, and yet still go back to my original control spline. So then what I'll often do is go ahead and put another shell modifier on top of this, and it defaults to the last inputs. So here you have this walkway or hallway, and it's all being driven from this original curve, or spline, better said. And this can be any type of spline. We can go ahead and change this to smooth if we want, and we're still going to keep that. And the segmenting is controlled by the original interpolation on our spline. So if we want to bring that up, we can, to get a smoother curve. So another opportunity the shell modifier presents to us in terms of architectural modeling is something simple like a window. If I go ahead and put an edit poly modifier above that, well, actually, let's go to our original extrude and give ourselves 2 segments there. And go to this edit poly, delete that. So something like cutting out a window becomes really easy as well. Where before this is something you'd have to boolean out or slice up the mesh, or and then close up the edges. The shell quickly accounts for those kinds of things. So that's the selecting, and the segmenting is at the top level. Sometimes I'll use that if I'm going to mesh smooth something to give myself more geometry on the edges so it doesn't smooth out so much. Now the last thing to go over, or that I'm going to go over on these, actually there's 2 more things probably, is I'm not going to go over the bevel edge, but I will go over the material mapping. So we'll quickly make a sub-object material. Let's set our number to 3. We'll go ahead and make this one blue. Alright, and by default the edges were checked off, so we don't need that. So let's go ahead and apply this, and they're all set to 3, I guess, by default, but let's go ahead and override inner materials to 1, so you can see our insides are blue, outer materials to 2, so that's, you see that, and edge materials to 3. So this is something that becomes really quite handy to quickly texture map. Again, in architectural modeling, not something that would be at the level of like fabrication precision or anything like that, but just to quickly study effects, the material mapping becomes quite a useful tool to kind of cycle through things quickly. So that's something that's also built into the shell modifier. Now the smoothing here, edge smoothing, if I bring this up to, let's say, 95, so anything under 90 degrees, or two faces under 90 degrees from each other, will start to automatically smooth. So you can either turn that off, or let's bring it down to 45 degrees, which is the default. So all of these we can see are graphically smoothed, but then the edges are not. And then if we don't auto smooth it, we can override the edges, which allows for these edges to be on a different smoothing group. If we start to toggle through these, you can see the effect of that. And edge mapping, this is for material mapping. I'm not going to cover that right now. But yeah, that's the majority of the shell modifier, and some of the things you can do with it. Like I said, it's probably one of my favorite modifiers in Max, and I really use it quite often, especially in conjunction with the extrude and the shell and extrude together, so you can start to get these kind of relationships for architectural modeling. It really is a pretty powerful tool.